Hi, friends. I'm excited to start chapter 2 with you. So, if you will just follow along, if you have a book, you can follow along, or you can look at the slides. Chapter 2 Big News. When something big is going to happen at school, the kids are always the last to know. First, the principal and the teachers and the other grown ups get everything figured out. Then they tell me and my friends about it, which doesn't seem very fair, but that's how it happens. So one Tuesday morning before Christmas vacation, there was an assembly for the kids in third, fourth, and fifth grade. I sat up front with all of the other third graders. The principal looked huge. Mrs. Cart is always tall, but standing on the stage that morning in a green dress, she looked like a giant piece of celery. There was someone else on the stage. It was this man I had never seen before. He was wearing a yellow sport coat and a purple tie with green polka dots. It was the first time I had ever seen a yellow sport coat or a purple tie with green polka dots. I thought maybe he worked for a circus. He sat on a folding chair and had a wide roll of paper lying across his lap. It was noisy in the auditorium. Then Mrs. Carp held up two fingers and leaned toward the microphone. Mrs. Carp should not be allowed to have a microphone. She doesn't need one. Every kid in the school knows how loud she can yell. When Mrs. Carp yells, it feels like the tiles are going to peel up off the floor and start flying around. No one wanted to hear Mrs. Carp yell, and especially not into a microphone. So it got quiet in about 1 second. Mrs. Carp said, "Good morning, students," and then she paused. So all of us said, "Good morning, Mrs. Carp." Then Mrs. Carp said, "I have some good news this morning. The people at Wonky's Supercomputer Store have been talking to our Board of Education, and in just 1 month, our school is going to have 20 brand new computers for our media center." 20 new computers? Isn't that wonderful? Mrs. Carp paused, so all the kids and the teachers in the audience clapped. Some of the fifth graders started cheering and shouting stuff like, "Yay!" and "All right!" and "Awesome!" So Mrs. Carp had to hold up two fingers again. It got quiet right away. Then she said, "There's a reason that I've been asked just there's a reason that I've asked just the third, fourth, and fifth grade classes to come in here this morning. And that's because during the next to last week of January, our school is going to have a science fair." Mrs. Carp paused again, but no one clapped this time. Then she said, "This is the first time we've had a science fair at Despres Elementary School. So this is something brand new for all of us. And to tell you more about our very first science fair ever, I'd like to introduce Mr. Lenny Cordo. He's the manager of Wonky's Supercomputer Store." Mr. Cordo. The man in the yellow sport coat and the purple tie with green polka dots stood up. He forgot he had that roll of paper on his lap. It dropped onto the floor and rolled off from the front of the stage. A lot of kids started laughing. Then Mrs. Carp moved back towards the microphone and the laughing stopped. Mrs. Snaving got up from their chair in the front row. She picked up the wide roll of paper and handed it back to the man. Mr. Lenny Cordo was a lot shorter than Mrs. Carp, so he had to pull the microphone down. Then he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Carp. I am so glad to be here." That's what Mr. Cordo said. Oops. But he didn't look that way. There was sweat all over his forehead, and the roll of paper in his hand was shaking. I guess we looked scary, so we talked fast to get it over with. At Wonky's Supercomputer Store, we love kids. At Wonky's Supercomputer Store, we think it's never too early to get kids excited about science and computers in the future. And that's why Wonky's Supercomputer Store is proud to sponsor the first annual Despres Elementary School Science Fair. And that's when Mr. Cordo held up the wide piece of paper and let it unroll. It was a banner. It said Wonky's first annual elementary school science fair. The biggest word on the banner was Wonky's, and the whole banner was upside down. There was a little laughing, but it stopped because Mr. Cordo kept talking. He wasn't scared anymore. Now he sounded like a guy selling cars on TV. "In the real world, the world where all of you will live and learn and work in the future, people get rewards for doing good work. And that is why Wonky's Supercomputer Store is offering a grand prize for the best science fair project in grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5. When you say those two words, grand prize, kids pay attention. It got so quiet I could almost hear the sweat sliding down Mr. Cordo's forehead. He saw we were listening now, so he took his time. That's right. There will be 3 grand prizes for the first annual Wonky Science Fair. And do you want to know what each grand prize will be? With one giant voice, every kid in the auditorium shouted, "Yes!" So Mr. Cordo leaned closer to the microphone and shouted back, "Then I'm going to tell you. The grand prize for the best science fair project in grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5 will be a brand new Hypercross functional Platinum 12 computer system." I couldn't believe it. For the past 3 months, the Platinum 12 computer had been advertised on every TV channel and in every magazine and newspaper. I had seen it on billboards and even on the side of a bus. The Platinum 12 was the computer I had been begging my mom and dad to get. It was the fastest computer with the coolest games and the best connections. It was the computer of my dreams. All around me, kids were clapping and saying stuff like, "Great," and "Cool," and "Yeah." And then I noticed Kevin and then Marcia. They were sitting in my row of seats. Kevin and Marcia were not clapping. They were not talking. Kevin and Marcia were sitting very still. They were thinking. They were already planning how to win that Platinum 12 computer. My computer. And when Mrs. Carp quieted everyone down, I kept looking around and I could see that other kids were doing the same thing. Kids were starting to think and plan. Mrs. Carp said some other stuff, but I didn't listen. I was thinking too, because I saw that the only thing standing between me and my very own super fast, super cool computer was about 100 other third grade brains. But I had a feeling that the only other brains I really had to worry about belonged to those two know-it-alls, Kevin Young and Marcia McCall.